Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 2, approval of minutes from April 24th.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? For selections comments. Just have a couple of things. Number 1, Bruce is here.
Perfect.
I just wanted to mention, I've been getting a lot of letters from kids in town. A lot from Island Avenue, Jeffrey, you know, the elementary school kids, and they're great letters. They're kind of activist in some ways. Lainey Paulding wrote to Save Island Avenue School. Grace Brown wrote to help with invasive species. Scarlett Marino wrote to me about plastic bags and cutting back on using them. Claire McGinnis wrote about plastic bags also and their effect on the environment. So I just want to say I love getting these letters from the kids. I try to respond to everything. They're really well written and well thought out. So. The other thing is I just want to talk about the Texas Pond walkway improvements. We have an RFP that went out Friday, May 25th. No, I'm sorry, it's due back. It went out last Friday. Due back by Friday, May 25th at noon. We hope to award the contract to the select consultant at the May 29th Board of Selectmen's meeting. OPM and DOT are eager for the town to move this project along. The RFP will be for the work and its associated engineering fees, which we will fund from our planning and engineering reserve account. Fact of the matter is, this is a grant that we got for $400,000, and we have a $44,000 match to go along with it. So we'll have to fund the match, but that'll be used for engineering services and whatever else we need to get this project done. This is one of those projects, one of our new projects that we're doing under a new way of doing business, where we're going to hire it out and get it done that way. So we sent it out to a short list of qualified structural engineering consultants, the same ones that we interviewed for the county road bridge replacement. So I just want to put that on the record. Good morning.
Good morning. I tried to time it so I missed all the controversial stuff. How did it work?
Not so much.
Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Number 4, citizens' comments. Gus.
Gus Horvath, 34 Aylesbury Circle. 2 items. I left in front of you a list of town meetings, and when I looked at the agenda over the weekend, I saw that you had a significant number of special appropriations. And we haven't had a charter revision since 2006. And actually, when we had charter revisions in the past, every 10 years, we used to bump up the amount of money that the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance could appropriate through the special appropriation process without going to a town meeting. And on that list, you'll see for the past 10 years, we've had 45 town meetings. And the town meeting, the legislative body is 13,000 people in the town of Madison. And under Robert Rules of Order, the quorum would be 6,500. But in our charter, we have a quorum of 75. Now, of those 45 town meetings you see listed there, 4 of them reached a quorum of 75, something like 8 or 9%. So the point I'm making is that our town charter is out of whack. We have not changed the amount of dollars that the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance can appropriate since the year 2000. And if we were to start a target change next year, it would be 2020 before a new charter would come in. So I would suggest to the Board of Selectmen that you might want to put together, once the budget is put to bed, and I know you've got a bunch of other things on your table, but I would be willing to put together a paper on the issues that I see in the charter that should be looked at, and also what the towns around us have done. For instance, the town charter in Guilford was changed a number of years ago to eliminate the discrimination against the Board of Selectmen. they made the Board of Selectmen terms 4 years, just like every other board and commission in town is. We're one of the few towns around that still discriminates against the Board of Selectmen by having 2-year terms, and all the other boards have 4-year terms. Also in Guilford, their town charter allows the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance to make special appropriations up to 1% of what the budget is from contingency fund and from the current year fund balance. So, you know, things like that I think you might want to look at. And if you think that from this paper that it's worthwhile, you might want to next year appoint a charter review committee. Okay. And the second thing is I sent you a paper over the weekend on leasing. I emailed. You can get forwarded? Okay, I'll send it again. The point I'm making is that I was in opposition to the lease arrangement that was being discussed for the Academy Street School back several years ago, because I didn't think it was particularly beneficial to the taxpayers of the town of Madison. The net cost, I thought, was too high. And I would suggest that we take a look at how we may or may not lease Island Avenue School if it comes to that. And that information would transfer to what we might or might do with Academy Street. So I have some experience in that. I have had a college level training in real estate in that area. So I would also offer my assistance in that.
Thank you, guys. Any other citizens' comments? Hearing none, we'll move along to old business number 5, update on downtown center project mid-section crosswalk. John, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say. I guess this was requested that an update be given. My opinion on this is we're still trying to complete the project, the downtown center project itself, and it's, the median and the sidewalks are maybe 80% complete. The rest of it from the fire station to Route 79 is still incomplete. So I think it's kind of premature to talk about design changes at this point until we can get the project, finished out. The crosswalk is going to entail, ripping up sidewalk, in some cases brand new sidewalk. So I think it's kind of not the appropriate time to talk about design changes at this time.
What's the timeline to complete the project?
Well, there's issues. It's up at DOT right now. The funding apparently was not there to complete 100% of the sidewalk and median. So we're looking at doing the DOT actually proposed that we do an interim plan that just involves pavement markings that will finish out the median from the firehouse to 79. So we're still working with DOT to move that.
In order to finish the original plan, it would cost over $1 million more. So what we want to do is we basically finished what we want to finish now.
Yeah.
And then if we look down the road for funding or feel like we want to fund it ourselves, that's fine. But in the meantime, we have a responsibility based on the grants with DOT to finish off the project. And so John's basically negotiating with them for what that'll be.
So do you have an illustration of what that revised strategy would look like?
Not on a plan, but I have sort of a written description based on the notes that I took with the meeting we had with DOT, where they kind of describe what the pavement markings would look like to finish that out. And been over the past week playing phone tag with DOT to try to come up with a firm plan on how to move forward with this. So I'd like to meet with them again and really get down to the nuts and bolts of what is the pavement markings going to look like, in terms of an island and turning arrows and that sort of thing.
Are we negotiating with DOT the design at this point? Are we proposing a design and then, or is there a back and
I
forth?
think it's more, it's sort of a back and forth, but it's DOT making their suggestions, and I think the next step would be for us to get it on a plan and get their concurrence on it. So it's, you know, I don't think it's anything that complicated. It's really just pavement markings in lieu of the brick island, or the granite island.
Can you set our expectations about how long that might take to come to that agreement?
You know, honestly, I haven't heard back from DOT in a while, and I just got a return phone call on Friday in the afternoon when I was out of the office. So I haven't gotten, hesitant to give you a time estimate on this. Kind of at the DOT's mercy, really, on, you know, how are we going to move forward from here?
One of the things that we're seeing with some of the state departments, like DOT, DEP in some cases, is that they've suffered a lot of personnel loss, and so their response time is, you know, I won't say awful, but it's not good.
So given all of that, throwing in an extra variable of changing the part of the project that is complete, is you saying maybe we should table that discussion until we've got the rest of this all settled? Is that what I heard you say earlier?
With regard to
the mid-block?
the crossing, I think so. I think it just makes sense to table that until we get this closed out, the extension of the median.
I think the point of the mid-block crosswalk was people talked about the fact that people jaywalk all the time.
Yeah,
And then, you know,
it's a safety issue. Yeah,
And thought, you know, we should have like a handicap access across the middle of the block.
Just for the law enforcement in mind, never do that.
I've seen it.
No, you haven't.
So anyway, that was like an attempt to address that issue, but there was never any funding put to it, never any, you know, anything more than a kind of an idea.
Can I ask this may be a very naive question, and I don't know if it's John or you guys, but, so, my wife grew up in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, and in the downtown area, there are plenty of mid crosswalks, but they are simply painted lines, not changing construction or anything. It's just a matter of spray paint. So I guess does it need to be that ornate? And
It wasn't a matter of ornate, it was a matter of making it ADA compliant. That's what that meant. We had to
off the medium.
Ramps, cutting out the center median.
The discussion was, do we do ramps up over the median? Do we cut the median, make it flat? You know?
Right.
So, I mean, it was just...
But I'm wondering, is there an interim solution to keep it simple versus...
I don't think
Go
so.
to each end of the block and cross the
It's still going to entail cutting through the median, so, and to keep it at grade, you know, you have to get up over the median or through it somehow, so.
Because they're all step-ups at this point?
Well, the median itself has a 6-inch curve, and that's right in the middle where it seems to be the appropriate location if the town's going to go forward with a mid-block crossing.
Yeah.
You still need to get through that median, and there's utilities under there and so forth, so there's, you know, it's not as simple as just painting it in this case, because...
I'm not trying to minimize it either. It seemed like there was a compromise or a simple solution we could go after.
Yeah, I wish it was, but I don't see it as simply painting it.
Okay.
Is there a possibility we would have to put in a traffic signal?
I don't know, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give, for compliance, the state, you're going to have to put warning signs, maybe due to a strobe. It may require that when somebody enters that crosswalk, they hit a button that will start the strobes. I forgot the distance, I want to say 150 feet out for braking, based on the posted speed limit.
So that's not the same as a red light, it's simply a visual alert that there's somebody in the crosswalk,
Correct.
which they're already required to stop for.
Well, because of the parking, it makes it very difficult. But it would be an extensive plan, I mean, and probably some money associated with it. Because you got to take down the curbs, you got to go through the center, you're going to take away 1 or 2 parking spaces, then they start a war. You know, there's a lot to it. You could put a simple, I guess you could put a temporary, but, you know, it would be a temporary.
I've seen a ton of those temporaries, I guess. Well,
Mystic, places like that,
Yeah.
they throw them up, but you have to educate the drivers to,
right, it becomes cultural, that's right.
I have a question for Lauren. Lauren, has this board ever gone on record to just show its support for the concept of a midtown crosswalk?
I don't believe so, but I can certainly look and let you know.
I wasn't looking for a formal vote today, but I don't know that we've ever, as a board, signaled that we do want the idea pursued at some point. We've talked about it, but I don't know that we've ever signaled that we would like to see something done at some point.
Well, I think we've encouraged staff to investigate this and come back to us with solutions. I think until we understand all of the moving parts, I'm not sure it's possible to indicate one way or the other.
Yeah, Bruce, your sense is the five of us do want work done on this at some point?
Well, I think we need to understand
Yeah.
the dilemma better.
I would, you're just trying to complete the project downtown, correct, which is stated on a certain design. I would finish whatever the project is downtown before you go and start throwing the caveat of a crosswalk, because you may jeopardize the completion or funding with that. That's a guess.
That's good advice. Thanks, everybody. New business, number 6, discuss and take action to approve the hiring of Teresa Eula to the position of payroll clerk located within the finance department. Position is non-union, rate of pay is grade 4, step 3 at $20.10 per hour. Position is budgeted, not requiring an appropriation of funds. Position vacancy was created by a reclassification within the department.
So moved?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Number 7, discuss and take action to approve modifying the bulky waste site operations to include the acceptance of recyclables, including electronic recyclables.
So moved?
Second.
Discussion. Trent, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So just to take us back a little bit, so for about more than 10 years, we've been seasonally, we provide household hazardous waste collection for residents in town. It's usually in the fall. Since about 2 years, we've every spring, we've implemented an electronic collection day for residents as well. And that was in collaboration with a company called Take Two Recycling. And through further collaboration with Take Two, we would do these one-day events every spring. And we did get a push from residents to say, well, this Saturday just doesn't work. Sometimes they just bring a sedan. They didn't have access to an SUV at that time. So we've collaborated more, and me and Tom sat down with the owner of Take Two and some other people, and we realized that Take Two also does other great things. They employ developmental disabilities, so it's a push for autism employment. What happens is they collect electronics from many different towns, and they employ some of these individuals with disabilities, and they're able to take the things apart and actually can refurbish them as well. We're talking about computers, monitors, TVs, some of these things that we get. And they also do have a rebate type of program with the qualified electronics that they do recycle from each town. And it would help, I think, just as a circle. I mean, we would have this bin. They man it. They bring all the supplies. They are in charge of all the collection and transportation of what they collect from Madison. I think this would be a step in the right direction for the town.
Trent, would the bulky waste station, transfer station in Guilford continue to accept electronics?
Yeah, I believe they will. I believe they will, but
It shouldn't affect them at all.
it won't put any effect. I think that
Exactly.
I think it merits opportunity for it to be a lot more convenient for Madison residents to just go to bulky waste site. Right now, John and I haven't really determined the location for the container yet. I mean, obviously we want to work on aesthetics of this bin and whatever hours operation it will be on. Probably just one day a week, but that's better than one day every season or every year. Sorry. So I think it'll work.
Thanks, Trent. So we'd like to, I guess at one point in the past, the selectmen voted to not accept recyclables, electronic recyclables at the bulky waste site. So we'd like to, I'd like to ask for a vote to modify that, modify the operations to include the acceptance of electronic recyclables.
Tom, I'm happy to second that. Is there some document we're modifying, or?
So the motion is already in there to accept recyclables, including electronic recyclables.
Right.
So you don't need another motion.
Okay.
So you already have a motion and a second.
Right.
And there is no like official document. You got just a note from the prior public works director about the operations that were suspended on August 24th, 2015. But now we just need to allow them again. So there is no like official document.
So we have not been accepting them since 2015, is that what we're
We
saying?
haven't
Or
had a place for
a
them
document,
anyway,
yeah.
All right, so, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Number 8, discuss and take action to approve a special appropriation request from the tax department in the amount of $3,500 to fund the prior year account based on proration of motor vehicle bills for the 2015 grand list, which resulted in overpayments.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, number 9, discuss and take action to approve a special appropriation request from the Public Works Department in the amount of $49,500 for snow removal services for the 2017-2018 season pending town meeting approval.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Is this it? No more
Yes.
snow?
No more snow.
All in favor?
Aye.
Number 10, discuss and take action to approve a special appropriation request from the Police Department in the amount of $30,000 for overtime special duties.
Second.
Discussion, Jack, do you want to talk about that at all?
What that line is, thank you, good morning. What that line is that's the highway construction where we have offices on construction sites, money to pay their salary at the time and a half rate comes out of there. However, we bill the vendor a premium for use of the car, insurance, workman's comp, all that. So generally the line, whatever's budgeted in that line comes back about plus 50%. We've already taken in over 30,000. So this is just to maintain the line to get it to zero come the end of June. It's more a bookkeeping procedure.
Happens every year.
Pardon?
Happens every year, right? Any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Number 11, discuss and take action to approve a special appropriation request from the Emergency Communications Department in the amount of $45,389.49.
So moved. Second.
There we go.
One of us.
Jack? Jack? or
Actually,
Joe?
I have Captain
Joe?
Race, this is taking over the budget for communications.
So there was a shortage due to an ongoing personnel issue that does not appear that it will be even wrapped up before the end of this fiscal year. So because of that, there's been a great deal of overtime, much more than we anticipated. So that's the result. That's part of the shortage.
Stacy, where would we be taking this from?
The Board of Finance will decide, but it will be coming from undesignated fund balance.
So do we include that in our recommendation?
No, that's Board of Finance motion.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Number 12, discuss and take action to approve a special appropriation request from the Police Department in the amount of $60,000 for overtime replacement pending Board of Finance and Town Meeting approval.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Jack, you want to explain that one?
Absolutely. This has to do with, we've had, when we had the storms through the year, through the winter, the storm itself, we take double personnel to 12-hour shifts to get through the event. The addition of personnel for the impact of Hammonasset on Route 1 during the summer months of last year. Now add to that, I've had an average 2 to 4 officers. I currently had 3 out on injury. This has been extended since August of last year. And one officer has been out approximately 6 months now. I have another officer who's out on pregnancy. Well, she's working light duty pregnancy. Will be going out in half an hour.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Number 13, discuss and take action to call the special town meeting on Tuesday, May 29, 2018, at 6:30 PM in Town Campus Room A to approve, number one, a special appropriation request from the Public Works Department in the amount of $49,500 for snow removal services for the 2017-18 season, and number two, a special appropriation request from the Police Department in the amount of $60,000 for overtime replacement.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Number 13, discuss and take action to approve line item transfers totaling $173,105.48.
So moved.
Second?
Okay. Stacy, you want to talk about this?
Sure. This is a big number, but this usually happens at the end of the year. A big part of the line transfer was moving some wages in the police department. Before Jack asked for the overtime special appropriation, he had wages available because of vacancies, so he was able to move those wages over to the overtime to reduce his special appropriation. Also related to these line transfers were payroll taxes that are budgeted in my office. So because of the extra overtime, we had to find money within. It wasn't a special appropriation. We found them in other various line items within the budget to cover the impact on the payroll taxes. That's the majority of them.
Anybody have any questions? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Let's see, discuss and take action to call a public hearing on May 29th, 2018 at 6:45 PM to solicit input on an application received for the DRS Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Grant Program.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Tom, remind us what this one is.
This is the library requesting a grant for the ground source heat pump.
Oh.
Anybody have any questions?
Well, usually,
I'm sorry.
it's an odd time. Is there a reason why we have it at 6:45?
There's something at
Because
6:30.
you have it at 6, you have a town meeting at 6:30, and then you have your regular meeting at 7.
Just cancel all those.
Okay.
Gotta slip it in there.
All right.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, because, yeah. Okay. A lot of paperwork today. Okay, number 15, discuss county school process and next steps. Lucy, you want to start that off?
Sure. Okay, so I had sent out a draft about,
Actually, that's 16.
From Academy School.
That's okay, yeah, you got to take it through that whole thing anyway, so.
well, so where we're at, right? Let me do a quick recap of what we talked about, what our last action was. We had a 9-part motion that discussed everything from establishing the ad hoc committee, which we're going to be discussing, all the way down to different options, different end uses for the building. We talked about looking for public funding for this, and we talked about the timeline that we might be able to get from the Board of Education. So we will talk about the ad hoc committee here, which will also roll in with the end uses of the building. The Board of Ed is working diligently on a date, so oh wait, I'm confused now. Never mind. Yeah, I'm sorry, they're working on a date for the turnover of Island Avenue so that if the public would like to include that option in the Academy School future, we'll have some date certainty around that, given it's early still. So I expect that we'll have that indication out of them maybe as soon as their next meeting this month.
Okay.
So they're working as hard as they can on it.
Okay, so the next steps are to number 16, discuss and take action to approve the charge of the Ad hoc Academy School Guidance Committee.
So I had sent out a draft to
Right.
the board, and I got some input back. Lauren, I sent you the input
Yep. I have it.
with the idea that maybe we would do some editing on the fly. And I think consistent with the way I've discussed this publicly before and privately with all of you, my intention when I brought this up was that the scope of this committee be fairly narrow. Really, maybe a better word is streamlined, with the idea that it is working towards a November referendum. So our goal is to get this question on the ballot for the general election. And my concern in a much broader, free-ranging scope was that it just couldn't happen. A large group would just not be able to process a lot of information quickly. And I think we've processed a lot of information already. So we're certainly not starting from step one. We've been going through this and over this now for years. And to that end, Dave has collected some preliminary data and is continuing to collect some data around these options that can be fed into this committee once it's constituted.
Yeah, just to follow up, and I met with Colliers maybe a week ago, Friday, with Bill McMinn, and we went over numbers regarding demolition, rehabilitation of the building. Those numbers should be finalized middle of this week, and they'll be provided to you. And then Colliers has offered to come to your next selectman meeting to present those to you. We also received confirmation that we received 3 building-only proposals from our solicitation. I think those got sent to us on Friday. I haven't gotten a chance to look at them yet, but those will be forwarded on to you as well. And I would recommend that you discuss those at your next meeting.
Are those from the same?
So
Yeah,
the
3 and
same
4.
group of
Nice.
respondents.
That's good.
Yeah. So we had expected 2, but a third one came through.
Oh, great.
So I think the comments were around the size of the committee. My proposal was for 5, and the scope of the committee. So I'm happy, for us to discuss those things now. I'll start with my thinking. I had proposed 5, again, in the interest of streamlining the committee and also realizing that they were going to be doing the bulk of their work over the course of the summer. Getting a large group together, all in the same place at the same time, would be problematic. So there was a suggestion that we increase the size of the committee, but set a special quorum rule so that it didn't have to be, it would be a set number, not a majority of the group. I am guessing we can do that. I'm not that versed in Robert's Rule of Orders. Can we set arbitrarily a quorum rule?
I believe you can.
Okay, good, that's it, we're done.
I gotta remember to do that.
I think you just did this to you.
So that said, that addresses my concern. So with regards to size, if we wanted to up it to 7, I do think with 7, we probably can capture all of the stakeholders in there,
Yeah.
especially since we're not going to take up one of the seats with the selectmen. So if,
I would assume the 2 selectmen that have been assigned are probably co-liaisons to it. Is that how we would do it?
I think we've assigned the entire board as liaison. I don't
Yeah.
think we're.
I thought you and Al were on some academy committee here or something.
That's
No,
Island.
That's Island.
It's Island.
I know, I'm confused too
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Don't
It's early
worry.
Monday morning, and I'm the one who got in at 2 o'clock last night. I don't get it. Okay, so is everybody happy with the changes or with the?
Well, that's the first one, I think, right? So, I mean, does 7 sound like a reasonable
I'm
number?
fine with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Definitely no more than that.
yeah, I agree
Okay.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think as long as we establish the quorum rule, I think that's quite good, actually. To me, this is about passion in the community. I think our community has expressed a fair amount of passion about this issue, and allowing them to get involved in the process is awesome. So this is what we should be doing.
So that one, the quorum is 4. That's actually not a terribly large number. Maybe for maybe it's something like the majority of those present, a quorum of 4 for any vote, for any action that they feel that
Sounds
they
good
can
to
take.
me.
Good.
Is that,
Yeah.
that seems pretty standard.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I would also say that as we go out and recruit, we let those potential recruits know that this is a fairly compressed timeline, that the process is going to move forward with quorum, and that we're not going to be able to endlessly reschedule around schedules. So that people know what they're getting into
Right.
when they get shanghaied into this.
My sense is people are raising their hands already, so I think we'll be fine.
Right.
I don't think we need to recruit.
So the scope, this one I think is, maybe a little bit more freeform in discussion. I felt it important that the Board of Selectmen own a significant amount of this process. Ultimately, it's our responsibility to bring this issue to the voters, and I didn't want us to over-delegate, for lack of a better word. So, that said, I've certainly, as I've indicated to you guys back in emails, that I'm open to input.
Yeah, I didn't
Suggestions.
not, the only input I saw was Jim and I responding to you. I never saw anybody.
I sent it directly to him.
Okay.
I think Al may have too.
Yeah, so, and Alan Scott both had input.
Okay, so I didn't see any of that, so
Yeah, so maybe we can talk about that.
yeah.
Yeah, so, Al, do you want to talk about your input?
Okay, I had a couple of points I raised with Bruce, looking at his draft, and let me do the easier ones first. Bruce, you had proposed a series of specific tasks for the committee. It was roughly in line with the 9-point plan that we had come up with. I thought that in terms of the way you framed it, I think that one of the questions that has to go to the public when it's time to do polling, which is somewhat down the road after we gather a lot of information, but I thought one of the questions needed to directly address the fields. Your proposed draft had the fields as part of, built into other possible uses of the building. And I think we need to understand directly from the public the specific question of the fields and whether they should be a part of any proposed building that goes on that site, or whether the public really seeks, the public's vision is that needs to remain either open space or ball fields, but not to be built upon. And the way you worded the questions, you covered the fields, but they were always part of the building.
So let me read it, and we'll get the full context of it, and then we can talk about Al's input. The revised paragraph reads, in consultation with the polling firm, the committee shall at a minimum consider possible uses for disposition and/or demolition of all or a portion of the Academy School building, including cost estimates for each option. By way of example, options to be considered should include, 1, the entire building and field or a portion thereof of the building for municipal use. And then it goes on to the other examples. So the language that Al is speaking of is the entire building and field or a portion thereof the building for municipal use. And I pick up that language, right, for the different types of uses. So there's municipal use, public use, private use, that kind of stuff.
So
I think my thinking in using the word field, because I went back and forth, do I say property, do I just say the Academy property? Part of the input we heard loud and clear is that the public thought maybe our language early in the process was vague. So I used the word field deliberately to make everybody aware that it's part of the discussion so that the community can then restate its desire for that. I'm not tied to that language, and I'm certainly not trying to imply that the choices, the building and the field, The choice is going to be the building and the field, the building or the field, do nothing, you know,
Yeah,
the
I mean,
entire
I
range.
don't think we need to lay out specific details about, I mean, if this committee doesn't come back with letting us know whether or not people want to sell the fields, then they haven't done their job. So, I mean, I don't think we need to tell them that. I think intrinsically they should know that. I mean, that's been the conversation, that's what started this whole thing, got us to where we are right now. So, I mean, I don't feel that we need to be a lot more specific in the charge. I think we need to be, I like the way he wrote it up, and I think, you know, as the committee comes back to report to us and let us know what's going on, if we have those concerns, we can address them then.
Right. And it's also important to remember, this is not the question that's going to get posed to the public.
Right.
This is providing context for the
This is
committee.
just exactly.
So, but that said, I'm not married to any particular language. If you guys have a different crafting of the words that you're more comfortable with, I'm okay with that.
I say we just say something about parcel, and then in parentheses, you put building plus field or something like that, just to keep it specific. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I'm comfortable as long as the five of us understand that the question of the field itself has to be
Absolutely.
directly addressed by this
Yeah.
committee, and that the public needs to somehow be allowed to express its views on using.
We are all on record, on tape, saying that's what we want.
Yes.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
And I was just trying to be careful not to presuppose what might happen here before we have a professional firm in giving us guidance on how to craft this, the wording around all of this. So if we want to take Scott's input and say the academy parcel, and then in parentheses,
Building plus field or field, building plus fields.
building and field.
And fields.
Okay, my second concern, Bruce, again, I'm more concerned about the five of us having a common understanding. The way you chose to write the draft seemed to emphasize the polling that was going to go on. And to me, the information gathering this committee is going to do is equally important, if not more so. I want to make sure that the five of us are in agreement that this is not just a committee we're putting together to conduct a poll. I believe,
Well,
It doesn't
so,
read-
no,
It doesn't read that way. I agree
I
with
just want to
that.
hear Al out.
It reads much
say-
more about a pool. At least that, I mean, read the first sentence of the, can you read the first sentence out to everybody? Just so we,
Yeah, sure. The committee is charged with ensuring a comprehensive and unbiased survey of Madison taxpayers and residents. This may not be good English here. Is conducted with regards to the future use of Academy School building and fields using a polling firm specified by the Board of Selectmen. So, Al, I hear your input, and you're right. My intention was that the scope of this committee be around ensuring an unbiased poll is conducted. The background work, the aggregation of data about what it's going to cost to tear down the building, what it's going to cost to rehab the building, and the variance on, is it a private use building, is it a new town hall, is it a community center, is it a curling rink? I think Dave's already deep into the process of discovering those numbers. We've got a lot of historical data to rely on, and I would expect that staff would be bringing that information to the committee. I wouldn't expect the committee have to go out and recreate that information.
I understand that, yeah.
So,
I think we agree with that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes, my intent, and again, as I've said to you, this is certainly on the table for discussion, was that the committee be charged with overseeing an unbiased survey. That they can come back to us and say, we as members of the community and stakeholders in this process have confidence that this was done to the highest possible standard that it could be done.
this may be the piece that's missing for me. I think we're all in agreement so far with what you said, is I envision a process in which the committee is presented with all kinds of existing information by the various staff people involved, the committee weighs, understands not only the costs, but begins to define the benefits of one approach versus another. But then it seems to me there's a public education step before the polling can take place. The public needs to be provided with information about, let's say, the costs and the benefits of the various options. We need to do a public information campaign, and only then can polling take place.
And so, I would put to you that in order to ensure their charge, that this survey is comprehensive and unbiased, if that's a pre-step to them delivering that, then it would be within the scope of what they need to do.
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing. Since I didn't see the words, I thought I would bring it up.
I just wonder in that, I keep going back to that first paragraph, because I think all the words below it actually speak more to what we were just collectively talking about. I just think there's a slight tweak in the wording of that first paragraph, because it to me reads very much poll only. So I think if we could sort of broaden that first
So
sentence.
why don't we just refer to the following language in the charge to be inclusive of all those things?
It's just
It
sort of a
seems to me
defining
it's
scope.
information gathering, public education, and then polling.
Right, so if we just say those three things, I'm fine with it.
Okay, so, Lauren, let's see if we can,
Yep.
we can get this.
This might be very hard to do this morning while we're sitting here.
No, we're gonna get it done. We're doing it. Nobody gets to leave until this is done. So I propose a second sentence.
Or, well, do you want to, I was gonna say, do you want to list it? The committee is charged with,
Boom,
one,
boom, boom.
providing, gathering
just
information,
do a call.
two, disseminating information to the public, and three, ensuring
Love
that
it.
a comprehensive poll is done.
That's it.
That sounds great.
That's it.
Okay.
What she said.
You're the best, Lauren. Have I told you that today?
Not yet.
Okay, any other discussion?
So, I'm going to float a motion that we approve the charge as edited this morning, pending our final review of the edited document.
What? Why not just, I mean, we just do it.
Yeah.
Well, just so that everybody has a chance to actually see the words on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's,
All right.
I appreciate you leaving the door slightly open, but I'm willing to vote on something this morning as long as.
Okay.
okay.
We do want to vote on something this morning.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I just made a motion.
So can I just ask a question though? So relative to the work that this committee is going to be doing, are the options being defined by the committee, or are the options being defined by the Board of Selectmen? Who's defining the options, I guess? And where are they being
Ultimately,
documented?
the Board of Selectmen. as a
I'm
result
I'm
of
just
the-
trying to, there's sort of
So I think
different
we,
bodies involved here now.
right,
so-
I think we have our arms around the different iterations that this could take. Everything
We have
from
developer options, we have building owning options, we have,
municipal,
Municipal
private.
but who's sort of the keeper of those options, I guess, and where are they defined? Do we own definition of those options?
Well,
Does the committee
we-
bring back definition of those options?
We took action on several options in our motion. The charge reflects those, but the charge also says by way of example. So if staff, the Board of Selectmen, and the committee were to, together or independently, come up with something else that's worthy of consideration, I would think it would just get mentioned, it would get brought up. So I'm comfortable that it happened in a kind of an organic way.
Okay. Anybody else?
Did you get my motion? Okay, so
That,
with the changes.
yeah.
Yep,
With the changes, so I think it needs a second.
it does.
I did.
Okay, Jean did? Okay. Any further discussion? The only thing I'd like to say is, if you guys are gonna respond, I'd like you to copy us, because Jean and I haven't seen any of the comments.
Yeah, I guess I just did a reply, so I didn't even think to do that.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, it'd be nice for me to see that ahead of time. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Number 17, update on the South Central Region Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Just
Yeah.
give you a brief update on this, and sorry to add to your paperwork, but thought I could give you one thing, and I'm Lauren, I'll give you a copy too. So this is a regional planning effort that the town's participating in to prepare a hazard mitigation plan.
Through the COG?
Yep, through the COG, through the South Central Regional Council of Governments. We approved one back in 2014, and so this is an update to that document. And we had a public meeting, actually back in November, in conjunction with the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, where we solicited some input from the town. Tom, you were at that meeting, I remember, in terms of what actions the town might want to take to better prepare for natural hazards. And so the packet I just handed to you is some suggested mitigation actions for the next 10-year period, really. Several of these are carryovers from the current plan, the 2014 plan. Middle Beach Road revetment, Garvin Point bulkhead, radio infrastructure improvements, Surf Club Dune, those were all specific projects that were mentioned in the current plan. We convened a staff internal meeting to generate some additional action. So emergency management, public works, police was represented, facilities, beach and rec, basically everybody in town that is some way impacted by natural hazard events. And we came up with some other action items that we'd like to try to undertake over the next several-year period. So I'll just go through those as a point of information. Utilize municipal GIS program and hazard mitigation planning efforts. So that's from the emergency management department. They want to better utilize GIS to both inform their decision-making process in terms of evacuation routes and other things, but also to help educate the public. So the public could potentially click on the emergency management site, how do I get from my house out in terms of an evacuation route? So we want to do a little better with that. Incorporate a standalone hazard mitigation section in the Plan of Conservation and Development. So this is when we're supposed to do an update in 2023, is to really place a focus on this in our POCD, and then there'll be several action items that are generated out of that. So this is one item that will hopefully have a lot of impact in the future. Circle Beach Road maintenance standards. Circle Beach Road is kind of a unique location from a hazard mitigation perspective because it's between the river and the sound, and constantly sand is being dumped and the road is having to be dug out during some big storms. So just to talk about that, to see if there's anything we should do differently to kind of limit our cost to continually repairing that road. Implement public outreach efforts to ensure residents are adequately prepared for natural hazard events, again through the emergency management. Compile first floor elevation data for houses in the flood zone. That's something that the building official would like to do. Identify hazard mitigation structure and infrastructure projects in the 5-year capital plan. So my take is that these projects will be shown probably as to be funded through grants, but that they're just in the plan so that they're carried over and kind of on everybody's conscious. Form a hazard mitigation plan steering committee and report annually to the Board of Selectmen. So this regional planning effort takes place every 5 years, and we're required to kind of give an update to the region on how we're performing in terms of trying to implement some of our actions. I thought it would be good for the town to have a small group. It could be a staff level group, or it could be open to the public as well, that has this as a charge to kind of follow through. Are we completing some of the tasks that we outlined for ourselves? Adopt a 1-foot freeboard requirement in the floodplain management ordinance. So right now, we require people to build to the minimum FEMA elevation. A lot of localities throughout the state have a 1-foot freeboard requirement, meaning you build 1 foot above the minimum base flood elevation. That protects structures and people's property a little bit further. So we'd like to suggest that that gets adopted. So that would be reviewed by you as part of an update to the floodplain management ordinance.
Dave, how close are we to implementing that?
We have a draft that was started a while back. I think we're probably need to reignite that process a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
And that one is the following one. Or
yeah, and then they expand the definition of substantial improvement in the floodplain management ordinance to include improvements made over 5 years. So right now, substantial improvement is if you improve a structure 50% or more of the structure's value, and it doesn't meet the FEMA requirements, we then have to elevate to meet those FEMA requirements. they're having situations where people will do 49% one year, and then 49% the next year, and basically should try to get around the requirement. to
We
elevate.
only have a one-year look back.
Yeah, and so a lot of towns have 5, even 10-year look-back periods, so that you can't game the system and bring the structure into compliance. So again, that would be reviewed as part of the floodplain management ordinance. Increase townwide tree and limb maintenance budget to limit road blockages and power outages during storms. Review suitability of town facilities for alternate shelter locations. Update the emergency operations plan annually. Update stormwater management regulations, and this is the partnership between land use and engineering. And then one of the items that came out of that public meeting we had back in November was kind of the idea of planning for extended outages as we get hit by more severe storms. I think we need to figure out a way that folks can be better prepared, and this may be on an individual basis. Maybe it's just a communication thing from the town, how we can be better prepared for long-term outages. So those are some of the concepts that are in the plan. It's been on our website in a draft form for about 2 weeks. The region sent out a press release. So if you guys have any further input, we have time to incorporate all that. From here, if everybody's okay with the draft, it goes up to FEMA for review. Months later, we hear whether they like the format of it, and then ultimately it will come back to the Board of Selectmen to adopt. Each municipality would adopt it because there's everybody in the region.
Is the expectation that most of these items, if approved by FEMA, will be funded by FEMA also, or is there,
So there's funding,
exposure by Madison, I guess?
Yeah, no, so what this does, if we have a hazard mitigation plan in place and we have projects identified in there, when we do go after grants, that we were in a better position to try to get those grants. And so, and if we don't have a hazard mitigation plan, we're ineligible for a lot of different
Okay,
grants.
that's helpful
So,
context.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
David, I understand the capital costs that you've identified here. What are the operating costs that we're going to experience as a town government just gearing up to do all of these things?
To do these things, some of them are, if it's not applicable, it means we're just going to incorporate it in our kind of day-to-day operations. So a lot of these items in here really don't have a lot of cost associated with them on purpose, because what we thought about was what are some things we can do now that would have long-term positive implications without costing the town a lot of money. So we don't want to come up with 25 capital projects. We want to come up, and so we talked about putting it in the POCD. I think that's a big step that gets putting it in the 5-year capital plan. So once a year, we're at least talking about, geez, do we need to do that revetment on Middle Beach Road? Is that a priority now, or is that still 10 years out? So we did that on purpose. So the idea of this was we didn't want to incur a lot of costs part of that.
We barely finished the current budget cycle, but when you approach us 6 months from now for the next budget cycle, are we likely to see some operating cost implications from this?
I don't think so. No, I mean, the only cost that come to mind is some of the stuff we were asking about today, snow removal costs. Do we need to think about increasing those budgets if we continue to get big storms every year, or, tree and limb
Or
maintenance?
trees.
Right,
Do we need
15 to
increase those costs?
25,000.
So, yeah, I think some of it is kind of the new reality. Do we need to budget a little bit more funding for those types of ongoing operations?
Thank you.
I think the one that will, it's going to impact us a little bit on the budget is the stormwater management, because there's some fees from the state involved in that.
Yeah, this stormwater management regulations, as I've written it, is really pertaining to kind of land use zoning regulations where private applicants would have to comply with certain standards in our regulations, and so it's related, but it wouldn't have that same cost.
Okay. Great. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. Number 18, discuss complete streets policy from the Ad hoc Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
I know there's 4 people here from the Complete Streets Committee here. Ellen Weiss is going to be giving a presentation. Virginia Rapp is the chair. Diane Hurdle sitting next to her, and Patty Bosco are all in the audience. So I'm just going to quickly have it ready to go and set up a PowerPoint presentation.
here, and then, Keith's close.
While Dave is getting that together, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Ellen Weiss. I live on Middle Beach Road.
Ellen, can you just get a little bit closer
Oh,
somewhere?
yes.
Or take it off if you want, you know.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I live on Middle Beach Road, and I've been a very strong advocate of pedestrian bicycle safety. In 2014, during a neighborhood initiative to improve the safety of Middle Beach Road, my research on traffic calming, I kind of stumbled across the National Complete Streets Coalition. And after becoming familiar with it, I felt a really strong need to make Madison a complete streets town. Basically, Complete Streets is a transportation policy and design approach that requires streets to be planned, designed, operated, and maintained to enable safe, convenient, and comfortable travel and access for users of all ages and abilities, regardless of their mode of transportation: pedestrians, bicyclists, handicapped, wheelchairs. So today, as a member of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, BPAC, I'm presenting this Complete Streets policy. And it is our desire that you seriously consider adopting this policy for the town and join the over 1,200 other jurisdictions nationwide that have done so. So, along with the final draft of the policy, which you should all have a copy of, we prepared this PowerPoint for further clarification and any questions or comments. These are some of the basic reasons why to implement Complete Streets. Obviously, safety, health, lifestyle, economics, bringing people into town will increase local economic environment, reduces use of automobiles, people can bike or walk places, and just creating a more livable and greater sense of community, people getting together and making the town a real place where people want to be. Benefits, older adults, sadly by 2025, 1 in 5 of Americans will be 65 or older. And I think there's a real need for older adults to be able to walk or get places and to get more, stay active and involved in their communities. It's a great benefit. Children, as we all know, there's this great epidemic of obesity. And if kids are able to walk or cycle to places, they'll be more active and hopefully healthier, and also gives them a greater sense of independence. People with disabilities, it's a shame to be isolated and not able to get around if you have a disability and there's no safe place to use your wheelchair or your walker. This is a real need, and again, it just improves independence and social interaction, very important mental health factors. Basic health, these are facts that women who walk 30 minutes a day have a lower risk of breast cancer. Men who take a 30-minute round trip bicycle commute are known to have better mental health. It just makes sense that people who live in walkable neighborhoods will get more exercise than those that don't. As I mentioned before, it benefits the economy. Local businesses, people like to live in a community where they can walk around, and so they are attracted to it. It's one of the reasons we decided to move to Madison permanently along the shoreline area. It's one of the best towns to get from where we live to town. You don't always think of jumping in the car. You want to walk, you want to bike there. So of course it increases the property values. It also connects the transit, the bus stations, the train stations to these centers, so that people will come in and enjoy the town and spend money here and help. It's all good. And just the community members. If residents in walkable communities, you just become more social and more engaged, and that just makes you feel good and happy about where you live. These are the typical elements of complete streets. Sidewalks, but not just sidewalks, bicycle facilities, cycling, trails, pathways, crosswalks, paved shoulders, curb cuts, transit connections, street trees, provide shade, benches so people can relax while they're going along, and signage to direct people, wayfinding, and also to let them know that this is a crosswalk. Oh, whoops, I got in there. So these are areas in our town where we have already done this. We know how to do this. We've put in great sidewalks to connect to schools, sidewalks with crosswalks. We've done a great job in the center of town with our curb extensions and crosswalks, and providing bike racks, street trees, and a big belly. We just feel we should keep improving this, and that is the reason we love this policy, and we'd like you to seriously consider adopting this. Because we continue to have existing conditions that need improvement. This is the corner of Island Avenue and Boston Post Road, where we have a great sidewalk that goes down, and then we have a goat path. So this is definitely worth considering. Other areas where crosswalks really need to be thought about. This is a pedestrian light on Lover's Lane, and yet it's almost impossible to get to it. This is the intersection of West Fork and Middle Beach Road, which is part of a very well-used loop, walking loop, but there's no crosswalks. There's sidewalks on the other side with curb cuts that kind of spill you out into kind of a dangerous situation, actually. There's a bad curve there, you can't really see what's coming, and, you know, these are areas that this policy would help us address. Bike paths, cyclists going along the Boston Post Road down by the intersection of East Wharf. Very narrow, almost impossible for him not to be in the flow of traffic. If we could either narrow the road and provide a wider path, these are all things to be considered. This is an interesting concept, advisory shoulders. This is Middle Beach Road, which is a disaster in this summer and has issues because it's so narrow. But there are ideas, and you know, I'm a firm believer that problems have solutions, and discussing them, trying to work together and figure this out. Advisory shoulder is that one concept where you don't put a center lane. You put two side paths for pedestrians, and the cars kind of slow down because they're not really sure what to do, and they wait for each other. It creates a more cautious driver, and it gives the pedestrians and cyclists, if you want to make it a bike lane, a place to be that is their place, and cars can go over into it, pass each other if no one is there. It's a new concept. Pathways for school safety. This is the picture of the track team on Norton Town Road. They go out and run, and there's, as you can see, they take up just about the whole lane. And this is an example below of traffic on Greenhill Road going to school, and perhaps starting some bike to school, or something called a walking school bus, where children can walk to school with in groups that are led by interested parents or adults, to encourage more walking, more biking, and less traffic. Part of Complete Streets also refers to shelters and access for transit connections. This is a bus stop on the Green, and on a rainy day, it's a pretty miserable place to stand. There should be some shelter. There should be the ability for someone with a stroller, a baby carriage, or in a wheelchair, to be able to get onto the bus or wait for the bus safely and comfortably. We have a beautiful sidewalk that leads into the train station, but we have no crosswalk from the other side of the street to the train station, or from this side of the street across. So it just is a matter of painting some lines in the road, but it's a way to change our thinking, our frame of mind, so that the roads are not just about automobiles, but they're about everyone who uses them. So by adopting this Complete Streets policy, it makes us think differently about how we use the roads, about the right-of-way, how the roads are constructed, operated, and maintained. It gives a direction and kind of a game plan that will be followed, which changes our decision-making process. And it doesn't have to be a big change. It can be small changes over the course of time. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You don't have to swallow the whole elephant. It's something we can grow into and get used to, but by having a policy, it will be considered each time there's something being done, even if it's just a maintenance issue where they're going to repaint or resurface. Do we want to make the side path a little wider? Do we want to make the road a little narrower so that we can provide paths for bikes and pedestrians? So it will have a long-term effect. Oh, that didn't come out so well. That's the Beatles walking across the crosswalk. So if anybody has any questions, or, I mean, I could go through the policy, but Dave, did you do that?
No, I think we put this on the agenda, not for action today, but we wanted to kind of go through it in a little more detail. I'll give you a quick 30-second heads up last time I talked to you. Again, the idea is that it's a policy that helps guide decision-making within the town. So, you know, I talked to John early on in this process, and we didn't want to make it onerous on the town. So it's really, a lot of this is going to fall to when we're conceiving of projects that we have in our mind, is there an opportunity here to make it safer for bicyclists and pedestrians in any way? And if the answer is no, we kind of go about our business without really any hiccup. But if there seems to be an opportunity, such as giving a foot wider shoulder so that a cyclist can be more comfortable on the road, and it doesn't have a cost impact to the town, that we can pursue those types of things. And so the way that it's outlined in the policy is that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee would name a single person as a complete streets liaison, and that person would likely work with me and interface with John in trying to, they would be the advocate for trying to find opportunities for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And John and I at the staff level would kind of vet out those opportunities and see if they're reasonable. The only high threshold component to this is if there's a big road improvement project like we did on Green Hill Road or Overbrook, that in order not to do a complete streets improvement, you'd actually have to get an exception from the Board of Selectmen. But everything else, maintenance, milling, resurfacing, would not require any large hurdle. That would really be up to John, and doing an analysis to see whether or not it makes sense. With hopefully my participation as well. But conveniently enough, in the Green Hill Road one, we did a complete streets improvement as part of that project. We put a sidewalk right along the school. So, and those projects don't come up every year. So I don't think it's a high bar. So adoption of this policy doesn't immediately create any cost to the town. But obviously, if we're going to try to incorporate sidewalks and bike lanes on a project-by-project basis, there will likely be increased costs in the future. We argue that the benefits would outweigh those costs over the long run. And so this is really a small policy change in terms of how we think about transportation projects that we hope to have, impact 30, 50 years from now.
So I have a couple of questions. And by the way, you know that I'm very much in support of this, and I recognize the difficulty in a town like Madison. It's 17 miles long, and has state roads going through and stuff like that. So I realize it's going to be difficult to do this. Is there any coordination with the Board of Police Commissioners on this?
I just had a brief conversation with Joe after. So Joe has attended just one of our meetings. He's kind of a liaison like me. The intent is not to change the decision-making process that happens now with transportation projects. So as the Board of Police Commissioner, whatever decisions that they're authorized to make, they're making those same decisions. So it's really how projects are conceived of in the very beginning and thought about.
Yeah, so I mean, you're working with John, we're going to do something to a road.
Yeah.
and there's an opportunity to make it a complete streets road. So you're working with John, you come up with an idea, does that have to go to the police commission?
We
for
would follow
review?
whatever process it is today. So if that's required today, it would follow that same process. It would change that process.
Dave, this is really a policy of planning principles.
Correct. Correct.
Oh, another question I had, a couple of years ago, the state came through and removed the lines on Post Road and, made the lanes narrower.
Yeah.
Is that to create an
Yeah, so the
opportunity for us to do
state,
this?
the state of Connecticut has a complete streets policy, and so they have to abide by certain principles when they do road improvements. And so that was an opportunity for them to make better accommodations for cyclists along Route 1. And the region, the South Central Regional Council of Governments, has a regional bicycle and pedestrian plan that they're currently in draft form. And Route 1 through Madison is actually the highest priority in the region to make it better for cyclists and pedestrians.
So would we be able to, or would we be able to ask the state to go along and mark those lanes?
Yeah, I think we could as part of, we could today, regardless of whether we adopt this policy or not. We could try to coordinate with them to do that. And I think I've been personally waiting until the regional plan comes out because I've participated in some steering committee meetings on that. And not of our actual self-interest, it actually just got arrived at that Route 1 through Madison was a priority based on the number of people that are riding through town and I guess in previous accidents, things like that.
Dave, are there any other boards and commissions in town that we should hear from before we take any action on this?
I'm going to mention it to the Planning and Zoning Commission, just as a courtesy, and I'm recommending that we think through some of these things in our zoning regulations and our plan of conservation development. So the idea of a complete streets and bicycle and pedestrian advisory group actually came out of the plan of conservation and development, which is obviously the Planning Commission's document. So this is really a result of their previous input. Obviously, I think Public Works and Engineering needs to take another look at it. They've got an opportunity to look through a couple drafts, but I think John wouldn't want to look through it again. Ken, with Joe's input, share it with the Board of Police Commissioners to make sure that they have a comfort level with it. But that's why we're not asking you to approve it today. We want to kind of introduce it to you, and hopefully we do some outreach in the next couple of weeks. We'll be back before you for adoption.
This will also be very important for our sustainable CP.
Yeah, so the adoption of a complete streets policy does get us points on the Sustainable Connecticut program. And so that's part of the reason why we've made this kind of our initial priority as a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. And then we'll be back before you with some other things, including hopefully a bike and pedestrian master plan, which would be a little more detailed than the policy document we're introducing to you tonight.
I mean, this seems to just sort of formalize, I would hope, what we're already doing in many cases already, right? This is just putting it more in sort of guideline or policy format
Yeah, so I think,
to remind us.
Ellen's slides kind of showed it, in the downtown center project, there was improvements made that are very much complete streets oriented.
Yeah.
Island Avenue sidewalk, Green Hill Road, so yeah, it just provides a little more formal guidance and offers a little broader input into those decisions than before.
It seems kind of like a no-brainer. Okay.
Well, it's pretty complex, so
Yeah.
we need to study it. But I'd like to thank the committee for their work
Yeah.
so far.
It's great.
And Kathy, thanks for getting involved. She started out with signs on her lawn, no trail going through your yard, right?
Well, we just want good planning.
Right.
And
Exactly.
Kathy just, I haven't checked it today, but Kathy's been working on a town webpage for the committee, and she drew up a logo, really done an excellent job for the committee as well. So
Nice.
you get a chance to go on the website and check that out.
Thank you,
sir.
Alan.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
it. Number 19, update the progress of the work group discussions regarding the possible future use of Island Avenue School as a private school. Al, do you want to?
Oh, Bruce,
Rock, paper, scissors? I'll start. So I think just as a high-level recap, Al and I took from the charge from this board that we should sit down with the group that wants to start a new private school and has shown interest in the Island Avenue property, to sit down with them and discuss in good faith whether or not this was feasible from the town side. And I think we've been doing that. We've had a lot of discussions, Al and I, about this topic. We've met with the group twice, and the discussions progress. I think, I'd like to capture some of the high-level things that we've been talking about. Now, these have not been negotiations. These have been public meetings where we're discussing openly what the town would need to see to move this forward to this board for action, and then their needs as well, okay? So at a high level, we've talked about, Al and I, candidly with the group, our need for fairly robust liability and indemnification from any unfortunate events happening on the property. And we've given them those requirements as handed to us by our carrier, Kerma. Okay, so we didn't create what that requirement would be. We went to the subject matter experts and we got that. We've discussed in a very, very broad range the revenue that the town might expect. Dave is working to fine-tune that broad range so that we can give them more certainty, but I'm hopeful that we've bracketed the high and the low, so that they won't be surprised with what ultimately we provide as guidance to the town, to the voters for, to vote on.
So there is no vote scheduled?
There is no vote scheduled. So what, from their side,
Madison Patchwork.
right, yeah, so from their side, their must-have in this process has been the timeline. They feel fairly compelled and constrained to a 60-day timeline to accomplish an agreement with the town of some sorts. Of course, an agreement with the town of any sort requires a town meeting. This is a taxpayer decided issue. So we discussed that 60-day timeline as around July 10th, July 11th. And said, okay, well then that would be the latest we could schedule a town meeting for vote. Now, we have to work backwards, Lauren, and you and I haven't had this conversation, but we need to work backwards from the notice for the meeting, the hearing, the notice for the hearing, and then the Board of Selectmen taking action to actually notice that, so.
That'll be next week.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So it's a tight timeline. I think of all of the things we've discussed, that has been the most concerning to me. That the town simply wouldn't be able to react quick enough to accomplish this in the time constraints that they've got. We have not found anything that says, no, we can't do it yet, but that doesn't mean that we will succeed in getting it done. From our side, what we've requested of them is demonstration that they have the financial resources to actually do this. And they are fine-tuning their numbers. They've offered up a statement of cash flows extending out several years that show how they would propose to pay for this. We don't have a good representation of what that is right now, but I know that they're working on it. I have faith that they'll get it to us. As a matter of fact, we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, so I'm expecting that's when we'll receive that from them. We have, Al and I, in front of us working up our draft of conditions and terms that we might attach to an agreement. And I think that we probably, the best we can hope for in this part of the process of leading up to a hypothetical town meeting would be a term sheet. I don't have any hope that we can have a completed executable lease. I think we can have agreement in terms on that. I mentioned it earlier, of course, the other moving part is the turnover date that the Board of Ed has. Obviously, if they need several months to vacate the building, then it puts us past the beginning of the school year, and so that may be a hurdle that can't be overcome. If they move out 2 weeks before school starts, then can a new school reasonably move in and assume control of the building. We also have discussed bringing Colliers and DRA in for a walkthrough. So the building is fairly well documented. The Board of Ed has done a lot of work around all of their facilities, including Island Avenue, and there is substantial documentation around the current state of repair of the building. And based on the conversations that the Board of Ed has had with the community, there is investment needed. We need to understand what we would consider to be a mandatory capital investment for any tenant. And those would be functioning around safety and security of the building. So we're working to schedule a meeting where we can all walk through. Colliers can provide color and information on, from their written document over into the real space. I'm sure I'm forgetting something.
I just want to address something, because I've been getting some letters from people who feel that I don't support what we're trying to do here.
Okay.
And, I've been speaking with the people from the school for, since they first found out that there was a problem. One of the things I've tried to make clear to them, and that I feel that they've understood the entire time, is that for us to do something along these lines, it's got to be good for the town as well as for them.
Absolutely.
It's got to be good for both.
Absolutely.
And so, what we're trying to do in this process is exactly that. We're trying to make sure that the town is treated fairly and is not, losing any revenues or any opportunities or anything else that would be detrimental to the town, while we're trying to help them. So, I don't want anybody to make a mistake and think we're going overboard to help them where it's going to cost the town money, but I also don't want anybody to think that we're not trying to do everything we can to create an opportunity because they're looking for a bridge. They're not looking for, I've made it clear to them, I don't think there's a long-term opportunity here, but they're looking for a bridge to get to the next place that they need to go to, and if it might be a couple of years, that might be what it might be. So, I just want to kind of be on the record as that's where I'm at with this. I don't see this as letting them have Island Avenue School for 25 years. But, if it helps them get to the next place that they need to be, that's what I've represented all along. So that's my feeling.
Right, and I would summarize that as just a good faith effort to see if this is a viable option for us. And I think that's the spirit we heard from this board when we were asked to sit down with them, and I'm comfortable that that's the spirit that Al and I have engaged them
And I
with.
think that's the spirit that they've had going into this also.
Mhm.
They understand the practicality of the whole thing, and we're doing our best to see if we can make it work.
Right. Right, and certainly Al and I have talked about, the objectivity that we need to maintain throughout the process.
Right.
And so I think.
Can I just ask a question real quick before you go too far? So just to what Tom was just saying, have we explicitly asked them the question, and maybe this is something you can just raise with them tomorrow morning, about the long-term need? Because I guess in my initial conversations with them, my understanding was that they thought that this might be a long-term solution for them. So I'm getting nervous that there's a disconnect there, so.
Yeah.
So we have talked in a very general sense about what they might desire to do in the future. I think Al and I have been very clear that our discussion horizon, the horizon that we're looking at is very, very short. We are not saying no to anything in the future, and we're certainly not saying yes to anything in the future. I think it would be fair to represent, Al, and you can scold me if I'm incorrect, but they have mentioned an eventuality where they would ultimately purchase the building.
They would ask to.
And our response to that is, that can't happen in 60 days. So let's not confuse the conversation with that. And couldn't be included in any sort of term sheet or lease agreement, because it would just be, it would have to go to referendum at that point. It wouldn't be just a simple town meeting. Two, if the town were to dispose of the property to a private buyer, there is a process for that. And part of that process would be RFQ and RFP. And so they shouldn't just presuppose
That's right.
that
That's right.
they can be the sole buyer without any competition for the land.
No, certainly.
So-
But even in that simple statement right there with, an interest in potentially purchasing the property, that to me indicates a long-term need for a facility, not a short-term need.
Right.
So I guess right.
And now, and I would also add, they've considered, they're considering building, they're considering a full range of things in the long term. In the short term, they are only considering the lease of Island Avenue. That is their plan A.
That's the only thing on the table.
Their plan A through Z.
I think maybe it's helpful to understand, they really have two different timelines in their mind. One is to get over a short-term situation, and the other is, should the school prove to be successful, then they need something much more permanent. We are only speaking to them at this time about their short-term need.
Short-term being a year, 2 years?
Right.
We haven't gotten there yet.
How can we define it?
Because, this property is also in the mix with the academy
So
discussion.
that's a great segue into maybe some of the more difficult conversations and ideas that we need to contemplate as a board. And that is there may be another potential use for the town of this property. Al and I haven't really considered that in our discussions, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there is a group of citizens that would like to see the island property used as an enticement for a private developer to make an investment in the academy school. And I am reluctant to take us down a path where we close that option off. And unfortunately, I raised this as a discussion, and I'm certainly soliciting feedback and impressions from the rest of you folks as to how we proceed, right? And again, in the spirit of good faith, working with private school people, but also not turning a blind eye to this other.
So I think maybe the first thing we need to do, that I need to do, is to send a letter to the Board of Ed and ask them to give us a response, because we've asked a couple of times and we haven't heard anything.
I think they now consider that they're in receipt of that request.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my last conversation with Katie, she said that they were working on it pretty hard.
What is the time frame?
I don't want to pin her down, but I'm pretty sure she was hopeful for an action in the next Board of Ed meeting.
Okay. All right.
Which is, I believe, the 22nd, is that right? Yeah, so I don't want to back her into a corner on that, but that's, I think, what she was hoping for.
Okay.
Tom, before I forgot, I just want to mention, I believe the charter reads that the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to need to provide some input on this lease agreement. So
Okay.
just in terms of building that
Good, thank you. I
timeline.
don't think we realized that.
Yeah.
So, to the bigger point, we've asked council to give us input as to who needs to be consulted in this process on the town side.
And I think you
The
had mentioned
boards and
something about
commissions.
beach and rec.
From my reading of the charter, it doesn't speak to the town becoming a landlord. It talks about us leasing, becoming a tenant. It talks about us selling, but it doesn't talk about us actually becoming a landlord. So we've asked council to weigh in on that. So you're gonna have to show me where.
Well, it's the use of a town building. It basically, it's just, I forget the section, but basically it says the use of a town building that's changing from one department to another department requires town meeting approval, and you have to refer it to Beach and Rec and the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that's intergovernmental. It's
And you're right, it does contemplate taking it from Beach and Rec and giving it to Public Works,
Yeah.
from town department to town department, but not from a town facility to
Right.
a privately leased.
But if you lease property under Connecticut General Statute 8-24, it requires planning and zoning commission input before the board of selectmen takes action. So there's a lot of different layers to it between our charter.
What's the involvement of Beach and Rec in this?
For the use that they're required to be referred to
Yeah.
in terms of the use of a facility. Yeah, to read the charter, it's kind of awkwardly written. But it's beach and rec and planning and zoning commission. So just as you suggested, that when you have town council build your timeline, just have that in the back of your mind that those things would probably need to be incorporated some way.
And so maybe you could get me what your
Yeah.
understanding is, so that when
Yeah.
we meet tomorrow morning, we can let them know that there's,
Maybe other steps.
yeah, it may not be a big wrinkle, but it's a wrinkle.
Can I just ask one question? This is for me when I talked to the planning and zoning commission. In terms of the July decision-making timeline, that seems to be driven by the fact that they're only able to secure a one-year lease from wherever they're going to land next year? Yes. Starting in September?
So my understanding is they have an agreement in concept with Christ Chapel in North Madison up on Route 79 for a one-year occupation of their facility that they have, and this is all represented by the private school representatives. So I haven't had any direct interaction with the church. They're willing to house them for a year, but have a desire to know with certainty before they sign the agreement that the school has a place to go after a year. So I think
My only
that,
question is that year, is there any flexibility to that? So let's say we're not able to come through by July, for whatever reason, the timeline. Do they have any ability to negotiate beyond a year?
that's a good question, and I don't know. I would say that also prime to the 60-day timeline is the need to secure staff, administration and staff. After a certain point, they're not going to be able to find the teachers and the administrators that they need for the school year. And I'm not versed in the vagaries of staffing a private school, but I would imagine it happens quite a bit in advance of the actual academic year.
Just a quick update. So I grabbed Katie real quick via text, and she said that there's a conversation happening at their facilities committee tomorrow, but there's no defined process yet relative to the Board of Ed agenda. They're going to start discussing it tomorrow at facilities.
Okay. Well, I was careful not to paint her into a corner,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
she did.
I wanted to check
She did
just in
say
case.
that they were taking the issue up and they were going to work through it as quickly as they could.
Yeah. I don't think there's a definition of acting or anything on the 27th.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And I mean, obviously, at some point, that becomes a problem we can't overcome. I guess we could build contingencies into an agreement, contingent upon the building being turned over, contingent upon the security and the safety of the structure and all of that. So we've talked about, from our side, the school needs to demonstrate it has the financial wherewithal, not only to start the school, but to run it for a period of years. And we feel this is a must-have that the town would need to receive, that Al and I would need to receive before we brought it to you folks for consideration. Do you guys disagree with that?
No.
Okay. We received from Kerma their expectations of indemnification and insurance. Do you agree that that's a must-have for the town? And by the way, the parents or the organizers aren't pushing back on these issues.
Yeah,
They
right.
understand.
No, they've been very logical and practical in any conversation I've had with them, and realistic.
Right. And then the other high-level thought is that the town would have to receive in revenues as a landlord, monies that are objectively equivalent to what that property would be in a fully developed and delivering property tax revenues
Yeah.
as a minimum. Is that sound like a reasonable position here? Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll continue the conversation then in that spirit. Again, we've had this conversation with them, they understand it and are not trying to negotiate us off of that. This is, I guess, just a check-in that we're on the right track.
Great, thank you. Do you want to open the agenda?
I would like to open the agenda, so this is a bit of a surprise, so I move that we open the agenda for purposes of discussing and taking action on beach passes for volunteers on town boards and commissions.
Okay.
I'll second opening the agenda.
So
Okay.
opening the agenda? Okay.
So I would like
All in
to,
favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I would like to move that we offer a complimentary beach pass for any member of the town who serves on a permanent board or commission, elected or volunteer, or so elected or appointed.
I will second that motion.
I'd like to just amend it to include volunteer firemen.
Okay? Okay. So.
Second as amended.
Okay, so discussion. My thinking behind this is that this town has a fabulous staff, okay? We run really efficiently, but we really do rely on literally hundreds of volunteers to give up their personal time to come in and bring their expertise to the town for the benefit of themselves and the taxpayers. And we don't really recognize that in any way. And my thinking is that a beach pass, a complimentary beach pass, is a small token that we as a community value their effort, value their work, and are thankful for that.
Okay, so I think that in order for anything like this to pass, it would have to be voted on by the Beach and Rec Commission. I mean, I don't think we can just, make an edict that that's going to happen and then we have to go along. I think they would want to consider it and feed back to us. I think it's only fair. It's a good chunk of their budget, or it's a good chunk of their regular.
How many people is it?
200.
It could be 200 people. Now, some of them will be seniors, and so they're only paying $10 for this, and some of them won't be. But I think we can pass it either contingent upon their agreement, or if it turns out that we don't need their agreement, then we can pass it contingent either way, right?
Do we need to understand the financial implications?
I would think so.
Well, so even if this is thousands of dollars, okay, in the aggregate,
It would be.
which it probably would be. I mean, assuming that all of them buy beach passes.
Bruce, I think the idea is wonderful. I'm wondering whether this is something we should implement a year from now. As I understand, they've already started selling beach passes for the current year. There's some administrative things as well as financial implications which perhaps have to be worked through. And I'm wondering whether we're just a little too late in the cycle this year to implement it immediately.
I agree with you, and unfortunately, we talked about this last year about proposing it, and never did it. So that's our bad for not doing that.
Is there another, again, in the spirit of maybe walking before we run, what if we started just with elected officials and then expanded it in year two? Sort of phased it in as opposed to, I don't know.
But I don't think any of you could vote on that.
Well,
fair point. I'm just trying to, soften the blow in terms of the cost.
I'd like to think that we, any unexpected loss in revenue in this budget, we could find in a contingency. You know, again, it's thousands of dollars, not tens of thousands of dollars. If we need to defer it for a year, we can. I hate to see the financial considerations get in the way of that, because again, it's not a lot of money.
I think there's some other reasons we might want to wait. There's some additional questions. For a family that takes out more than one pass, would we be limiting it to one pass?
I think that's the intent.
And I said, the
So it's just
A
for the
beach pass,
volunteer.
the motion would be for a beach pass.
So
If you
for one
provide
volunteer.
two, we give you the second one free. That's only $10 as opposed to 40.
Another question that might have to be thought of administratively, we have a lot of ad hoc committees which volunteers put in a lot of work. They're not officially boards or commissions. We do appoint these folks.
Right.
And I think we have to think that through as well.
So in my motion, I said permanent. I do recognize that we've got a lot of ad hoc committees out there. But yeah, my motion was for permanent commissions or boards for volunteer fire department.
Well, let me say again, I really like the idea. I feel like trying to implement it immediately, we're going to create some administrative difficulties. And I think it would be prudent for us to vote on this without understanding some kind of a financial estimate of what this is going to mean. Bruce, I have no idea, whether it's thousands of dollars or more or less.
Do we know whether Scott and his Beach and Rec team are supportive of this?
I can imagine they're not.
Yeah.
Well, we have to make them whole in their budget.
Mm-hmm.
I think
This
this
doesn't affect their budget. This is only revenue for the
Revenue,
town.
right.
So it's just revenue. It's not their, it doesn't come back to them, right?
Correct.
Goes to the general fund.
So why would they not be in favor of it? If it's
They don't
not
like
in
exceptions to the rule, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why they might not. And also, just because it is a revenue line item for them.
Well, but it's a revenue line item
For the town, not for them.
Yeah, it's also administrative. I would think that it would cost some more work for the office.
Right. So anyway, I mean, if somebody wants to change the motion to study it with the idea of putting forward a proposal going forward, that would work, or we can vote on this and see what happens.
I'm open to suggestions. I mean,
Why don't we just send the motion and ask at the next Beach and Rec meeting,
Well,
and they consider it?
I think you can make a motion to recommend that the Beach and Rec Commission
Consider it.
takes on
Yeah.
this consideration and then would make a recommendation back to you as to the feasibility.
Yeah, that's
Is that
probably.
good?
Yeah.
You happy with that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
Lauren
let's
keeps saying
withdraw the other motion
That's why she's the best.
and make a motion to recommend to Beach and Rec that they consider free beach passes for permanent volunteers and volunteer firemen.
Second.
Any further discussion? Nope. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Number 20, discuss and take action to set the parameters of the annual Town of Madison Donald Rankin Community Service Award. Al?
This Board of Selectmen created this award several years back.
Actually, a little over a year ago.
A little over a year
At the
ago.
end of,
And we created the award to both recognize Donald Rankin and to, in the future, identify people who have worked for the betterment of the town of Madison. Since this award was created by the selectmen, I guess we, the selectmen, have to sort of come up with a way for administering this. And my thinking is because this is a very hard to define award, that literally the selectmen who are in office at any given point in time have to be the ones who decide who is worthy of being considered for that award. So I don't think it's meaningful to try to erect a very complicated series of procedures about how this happens. So I'm going to suggest to this Board of Selectmen and the future Board of Selectmen that the 5 people sitting at this table will decide who is worthy for this award based on whatever criteria are in the head of the 5 people sitting at this table.
Okay, so just a suggestion, because when we did this last time, you had a question about the process, and I asked you to take it over so that we could, we could develop a process. The JCs gave out they don't seem to be doing it anymore, but they used to give out an annual Distinguished Citizen.
Oh, right, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, DSA, Distinguished Service Award. And it was for somebody who did something in the prior year, that was worthy of note, and they accepted nominations from the community at large.
Mhm.
So maybe, since they're not doing it anymore, maybe we could kind of pick up on their lead on that. It's not a very complicated program, it's just a matter of accepting nominations from the community, like I said, with little documentation about what the person has done.
Yeah.
Because what
There
sometimes
was like a little
happens.
application, if I remember right.
Sorry?
There was
Yeah.
like an application.
It's a page long,
Yeah.
it just basically listed things, but what it did was it kind of was a screening process so that it wasn't a lifetime service award, it was a distinguished service award for the prior year, so this person did all these things this year to help our town.
I agree with you, Tom. I think this award should be based on the body of work that an individual has produced on behalf of the town, perhaps not in a given year, but perhaps
That's fine, too.
even over
Yeah, I
a
think
longer course of
that's open
time.
for suggestion.
Yeah.
I guess the second part of your suggestion is one that I think we need to think through very carefully. When we have a public process where a number of names are put forward by the public, and we, the Board of Selectmen, only choose one name out of that, we are potentially inadvertently somehow perhaps diminishing the folks whose names weren't selected. And I just think we should think through that carefully, whether we want to find ourselves suddenly being lobbied by groups who are advocating for one person or another, and then we have to end up making a decision which is, of course, counter to the purpose of this award. People who are working for the betterment of the community should be honored.
But if we just choose one person arbitrarily or randomly or whatever, aren't we doing that to everybody else anyway?
I mean, I think by opening it up to the community, you're finding people out there that we might not know what
That's
they're
a good
doing.
point.
I mean, that's
That's a
the
good point.
advantage of that, because I remember the JC's DSA awards, and there were quite a cross-section of people. And I guess they were in the same position in having to vote on one. And again, it doesn't say all 5 weren't worthy of it. It's just saying if you have one award, I guess you have to make a decision. So it's a good point, but I think we just sort of have to.
I mean, so I was a recipient of that award, and I mean, you went to a dinner, and the 3 candidates that were up for nomination were at the dinner, and
Yeah.
you found out that night who
You
was
found out
winning.
that I was one year,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
won, I lost, so.
Oh, it was the same.
No, it wasn't. It was a different year.
I
It was a
didn't mean
different
to
year.
bring that up. That's awful.
Well,
Sticking my foot in my mouth.
I like the idea of soliciting input from the different volunteering groups, so that, JC and Rotary and other groups that are working extensively, the Land Trust, with volunteers, where maybe they can put names forward for our consideration. I don't think we should have a public list of frontrunners where we then create the opportunity to hurt feelings.
Yeah.
That's not the spirit of this. Maybe we can formally solicit input from these groups, and then we can discuss who we think might be.
Is this done at a particular time during the year, or is it at our discretion?
I think it's our discretion.
Yeah, we're just setting up a program now, so we can do it.
I don't mind trying it, Tom. I think we can try to model it on what was done previously and see if it works for us.
Good. Thank you.
I think Chief Drum is looking to nominate himself.
I was just, I'm reaching into the past, oh my gosh. When I was at the Board of Selectmen in the town of East Hampton, we had this dilemma, this conundrum. It was named after a gentleman in the ambulance who contributed a lot financially in his time. So we had all these volunteers like we have in this town. So we decided we'd name it after an individual, but we had a volunteer of the month. And one of the monthly meetings of the Board of Selectmen, we then bestowed this volunteer of the month. And then at the end of the year, we had a picnic with all the volunteers of the month, and we invite people from the previous year. It started gaining. I left. I'm sure we're up over 100 now, but that's how we address that.
Police department going to pay for the picnic?
Pardon?
Will the police department pay for the picnic?
If you approve the budget.
Is that a negotiation?
We have,
I don't think we really have anything to,
Take
well,
action.
this was discussed, I should set the parameters of the annual town of Madison ballot rate.
I would move that we.
Table that and come up with some parameters.
Yeah, that maybe relies heavily on input from community volunteering organizations.
I'll get you a copy of the J.C.'s application.
All right.
We can start with that.
You feel we should adopt a formal procedure?
I think it would help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but we'll table it for now. Number 21, discuss and take action on a proclamation honoring Eagle Scout Jackson Martin. Who would like to read the proclamation? Gene?
Sure.
Quiet, Tammy. Oh, you got it?
Yeah, we
I forgot, sorry.
Yeah.
Whereas the Board of Selectmen of the town of Madison hereby proudly acknowledges the outstanding award of Eagle Scout to a member of the Boy Scouts of America. Whereas throughout his commitment to community with a dedication of purpose and a commitment to a high level of leadership excellence worthy of acclamation and praise by this board and the entire community. Whereas the board gratefully recognizes tremendous efforts of this young man, it is with great pride that the board officially extends their congratulations to this newly awarded Eagle Scout and wishes him all the best of luck in his future endeavors. Furthermore, that by the powers vested in the Board of Selectmen by the state of Connecticut and the Madison Charter, we, the members of this board, hereby unanimously acknowledge the scouting achievement of Jackson Martin. Done this 14th day of May, 2018, in the town of Madison, Connecticut.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Number 22, discuss and take action to approve moving the regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen from Monday, June 25th, 2018 to Tuesday, June 26th, 2018.
So moved.
Second?
This is because the graduation has been moved to Monday, June 25th. If
Yeah.
we get any more snow days, we'll be doing this
I'll
again.
need to be at graduation for sure, so.
All in favor?
Aye.
Discuss draft temporary meeting, town meeting room policy. So, Lauren, did you draft this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Al suggested this because of the fact that the library is going to be closed for a while, and there's people that use a lot of meeting space over there, and we might be able to help them out. So my only caution was we need to have town business take precedent, because we also have a lot of requirements for space. But we do have, we have rooms here, we have rooms at the senior center and Memorial Town Hall, so.
Tom, we may also have restrictions in terms of the groups that we would even consider allowing in here. I'm not sure it's written anywhere, but they had to be civic, nonprofit groups.
It is written in the minutes from 2003 or 2006, I can't remember. But there's a motion and an approval of limiting the groups that are allowed to use the rooms here. This temporary policy will allow groups outside of those restrictions, temporarily only until the library building is complete.
But I believe it's still our intention that the groups we would allow in here to use the facilities are civic groups, not-for-profit groups based in Madison. We're not opening our meeting rooms to the world here.
So we don't want to be an I?
Well, I guess maybe the five of us need to chime in here, but I thought historically we were very fussy about who could use the rooms here.
Historically and currently, these rooms can only be used for town business. We do not allow pretty much anyone outside of town business to use any of these rooms.
So
No
could-
civic groups, no other groups, even if they're based in Madison, can use town, this building.
So would we be able to get a list from the library of the groups that currently use the space?
That's a great idea.
And maybe limit it
To
to
those.
them only? Unless we feel there is something in there that,
I guess that's it. What should be the guiding principle here?
and maybe the easy place to start is, let's look at the group of people, and if they're innocuous, then we just say, okay, this is the group, it's frozen, no other group.
I was at a senior commission meeting last week, and there was one of the members there has a group that has used the library, and she was talking about the impact, that they aren't going to be able to use that anymore. So, yeah, I'm sure that the library has specific guidelines as well. Now, I know the chamber used to meet, they don't anymore, but used to use that downstairs. And I think there were some other, basically civic-type groups.
I think
So-
like for-profit tutoring and things like that probably wouldn't make sense.
Correct.
But I mean, I think if we got a list from the library of the groups that use it, we could make a determination if we felt that we could go
I
back.
think that's the best place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll get that list. Number 24, discuss and take action to accept the resignation of Matt Parthasarathy from the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second?
With our gratitude for his service.
Absolutely. All in favor?
Aye.
Tax abatements refunds totaling $5,940.88.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Number 26, citizens' comments.
Good morning, Catherine Hunter, 31 Scotland Avenue. These comments are a bit anticlimactic because I didn't know that the board would be voting on the charge, and I didn't know the charge would have changed. The first comment is, because as a member of the public, we don't have a copy of what you're talking about, I'm doing a little bit of guessing here based on the discussion that you've had. I don't know if it's possible in the process, but it would be helpful to be able to see motions and other written, I guess they're all going to be motions, written motions that are before the commission, particularly if it's on a matter of significant public interest. Based, however, just on what I heard and guessed is in whatever was before you that you voted on, I have 4 comments. Initially, my reaction was, I'm a little bit in a time warp here. It didn't sound like what you were discussing was very much like what we had previously seen. I had the benefit of the charge that I believe had been drafted by Dave Anderson at the last meeting, and that charge was comprehensive and actually was a pleasant surprise for us. The charge started with the committee actually being involved in the consideration of the uses for and defining the options, and then it went on to discuss the composition of the committee as 12 members, and there was a fair amount of detail. So what you had before you today seemed to have changed dramatically, and I guess if we were allowed to engage, I would ask why and what happened, because I don't believe this had been discussed publicly since that meeting where I'm looking at the earlier charge. So I believe whatever happened must have happened in discussions between you all privately. And I guess there's a comment in there somewhere. In terms of the drivers, while I respect very much the process being not expedited, but being moved along at a very good pace, I agree with all of you. And comments made by our first selectman that this process has gone on a very long time and that we need to reach an end point here. I'm not sure that I agree that establishing November 6th as the date of the referendum should be the driver. I actually think that's a little bit of the tail wagging the dog, which is a phrase I use quite a bit. It seems to me that the determination of the committee, the cost-benefit analysis, the evaluation of the estimates, and then the framing of and the implementation of the poll should actually be the drivers. And that if that all works out, with everyone moving along in good faith and at a good clip, then the referendum should be set. And again, I take no exception with the November 6th date, but Bruce, I think that you, in discussing why you thought the committee should be dropped down from the originally proposed 12 to something like 5 and then a compromise at 7, said too many members might make it difficult to get something done by November 6th. So for the public record, I actually think that the membership of the committee should not be tied to that driver. In terms of the scope that you were discussing, I believe someone mentioned it, again, it may have been Bruce, that the BOS wants to continue to own a significant amount of the process and doesn't want to over-delegate. And here I would have to say that I don't believe that the public response to what's been going on is any kind of concern that the BOS is over-delegating. I think it's actually very much the opposite, that the public very much wants to be involved in the process. And the feeling about the committee is that the committee would give those who have very recently come out and strongly come out for a position or for involvement in the process, that they feel that the committee is representative of their involvement. In terms of the scope, again, I'm commenting blind here because I don't have it in front of me. I believe when it was raised by your members that the charge perhaps doesn't include who defines the options. A couple of times I heard, well, that's implicit in there. And forgive me the occupational hazard here, but if it's not in the charge, the concern is that will not be within the scope of the committee. So I hope what you all just voted on, and I say this for the public and for the constituents of our grassroots effort, Academy Save the Heart of Medicine, I hope what you voted on allows the committee members to define and explore the options as well as the logistics and the crafting of the poll that ultimately goes to the public. We've said before, everything's in the options. And what we had seen previously, again, I think it was prepared by Dave, and I was very pleased by it. The options were laid out, and then I read the Selectmen's desk, I believe 2 sources ago, and Tom said, let's keep all options on the table, including the high-density development. So that would be added to what we've seen here. Flying blind here, I hope that the committee is able to be involved in the process for defining the options, even if they include a high-density development. And then finally, to the comment that I believe that Al made regarding the land use, if there's one thing that I think has been made loud and clear over the last 2 or 3 months, it's that the public is opposed to the use of the fields and the land in the solution to Academy. Our group made sure we cast a very wide net in soliciting public opinion about this. We've been very candid about the fact that we did not have consensus on a solution, but we certainly achieved consensus on the Save the Land. Wrong 5 acres, not in the heart of our village district and our historic district. Most of these comments were for the public and the constituents of our group, but I'm hoping that if it isn't already in the express language of the charge, that when you compose the group and appoint them and you talk about the details of the charge, it does include the options and defining the scope as well. Thank you.
This has been working while we've been meeting.
Yeah. Gus Horvath, 34 Aylesbury Circle. I had mentioned earlier about sending you guys some information about the Island Avenue School issue. And I would assume the board is not surprised that I attended the workshop with Al and Bruce that they had with the folks there. And I had offered my opinion as to what I thought might be considered if we're going to go forward with this type of thing. And in general, what I indicated was that whatever would be the arrangements if this were to go forward, that there be no net cost to the taxpayers of the town of Madison. And what I meant by that was taking a look at something like a triple net lease, where the leasee, would be responsible for both the operating and the maintenance costs of the building, and that the lease fee at a minimum would be what the property tax would be on the present assessed value. And I probably screwed up again when I thought that I had sent this to the board last Friday. I entered everything in the computer, I probably didn't hit send. I've done that before, so I apologize for that. But this is the information that I sent and essentially the comments that I just made.
Thanks, guys. Okay, hearing no more citizens' comments. Number 27, liaison reports, selectmen comments.
Excuse me. Can I just ask a question? When will the committee be chosen for the academy? We all have the charges and all, but we don't really know when you're actually going to put this committee together.
So we have selectmen comments coming up.
Okay.
So they'll
Address it there.
we'll see if we can address it there.
Okay. Thank you.
Nicely done. Who's first?
I'll go first. I'll go first, because what the heck. Okay, so I'll get to my liaison reports. I want to maybe clarify, based on some of the comments that I heard. The first one is really the easiest one. We've heard over several public hearings from a very vocal group, and large and vocal group, that the fields need to stay as fields. Whether or not they stay as open space or ball space isn't resolved. This process isn't trying to diminish or undo, from my perspective, that at all. Quite the contrary, I'm looking to put a measurable number to that. So as we go out and survey the community in a way that we can report back with some data-driven numbers, I'm expecting that we're going to hear that result back loud and clear, and once and for all can say that the groups that we've been hearing from fairly represent the taxpayers. I will be shocked if we hear anything differently. In the interest of fairness, I think we need to put that to bed once and for all. So nothing in this process that we're embarking in goes anywhere near trying to take that off the table. And really, it's quite the opposite. The way we make documents public is typically they're with us until we've discussed them, taken action on them, and then they become a public document. So the documents in draft typically aren't circulated in advance of the meeting, and that's just the normal business of all of the boards in town, and I would venture to say in the state. The charge that I amended, or the edits that I made to Dave's draft, really got back to what my original vision for the committee was. So I think to the question, why did it change, really what it did is I brought it back to what I originally intended when I suggested. And then with the edits that we agreed on and voted on, we did include that broadening of scope to consider the options, to consider the costs, and really without limit. Okay, so we're not bracketing a 3 or 4 choices that the committee can consider. It can consider anything. I think the biggest thing that we limited in this discussion was we're not charging the committee with creating the cost estimates, to go out and solicit what will it cost the town to build a new town hall on that site. That's outside the scope of the committee. And the committee will rely on town resources for the numbers and the historical data for them to consider as they move forward. And you guys can correct me if you have some different recollection of that. With regards to the November 6th vote, I think we've been pretty consistent, at least from my recollection as a board, that we would like to see this question brought to the voters in this calendar year. November 6th is virtually the end of the year from a from a town government perspective, and the natural time for us to put a question to the voters.
And it should give a reasonable turnout, and it doesn't cost us anything extra to do it at the same time.
Right. But as we were all clear in the very, very beginning of this process, where we set I think a February referendum date as a goal, we acknowledge that if something happens that makes that date unreasonable, then we would consider that. But we need to start with a goal. We need to start with a place to arrive at, and I think the November 6th one is, it might be a little aggressive, but I think it's a good date to shoot for. So I'm hoping that I've addressed most of the substance of some of the questions. By the way, what we didn't discuss in the draft, everybody will see, is that these are of course going to be public meetings with, this committee will be a public meeting with opportunity for public comment. So the committee will have the chance to receive input from others of all thoughts, and incorporate that into their consideration. Okay, so that's all I have about that. Now I've got a couple of liaison reports. EDC will be recommending a final draft for action on the Town of Madison Tax Incentive Program. So we saw a draft of this some months ago.
Yep.
And they've worked on it now to the point where they think they'll be able to give us an actionable document. So maybe as soon as the next
Yeah, I think it could be on your next agenda.
the next meeting. I recently attended the Board of Education meeting, the May 8th meeting. A couple of interesting things. Their updated kindergarten enrollment numbers are now at 131, so they were projecting 138 students in the fall. Their enrollment number is at 131. Of course, that is all subject to change. I guess that's an important number in the context of the graduating class this spring, which will be somewhere in the vicinity of 300 or so kids. So that leading edge of smaller classes will become freshmen next year. So we're graduating 300 students, and we will welcome in as freshmen something closer to 150. And then the classes all the way down to next year's kindergarten are in that range. Again, plus or minus. The Board of Ed, and importantly, the Board of Ed has had an unusually difficult year with special ed costs. So they have exceeded their budget for special ed and are running in deficit around that. So we should expect them to come to us with a special appropriation request out of the special ed reserve. This is an account that the town keeps to help insulate taxpayers from the lumpiness of special education year over year. They do a good job of predicting it, but sometimes they just are hit with more costs than what they budgeted for. This would appear to be one of those years. We have a reserve for this, and there is sufficient money in there to do that. The number that I heard was $60,000. I think that they are still putting a fine point on that number, and on this one, I'm pretty sure they are going to take action on the 22nd, right?
Hope so. That's fine.
So that's all the news with the Board of Ed, and I'm done. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you could have brought it up too, but I'll bring it up. So the Board of Ed has a recommended new candidate from the DTC to backfill Matt's resignation, and I recommend that we set a special meeting this week, before the end of the week, to get that confirmation in, so we can get that person seated and working on the Board of Ed. So, Lauren, how do you want to do that? Do you want to do that at the end of the meeting? We can just agree on a date? A date and a time?
Perfect. Sounds great. Thanks. I'll go real quick. So I agree, November 6th, referendum, aspirational, but I feel no no boundary there. I think if we're ready, we do it. If we're not ready, we don't. I want to remind everybody of the budget vote upcoming, and it's obviously tomorrow. And I guess I was going to suggest to the first selectman and just to our fellow selectmen that maybe we consider a robocall, get the vote out call. I just think it helps remind people of the vote. We see the signs out there, but I don't think people are always paying attention, and I think it would get support out there. I attended the Madison Youth and Family Services Enrichment event, which was on, it was last week. It was a really nice event that the team, Angela Ahern, Melissa Boletto, and Catherine Barden ran for Scott Cochran and his staff, as well as the entire board. We learned a little bit about hidden drugs and alcohol paraphernalia in a student's room, which I found enlightening, of all the things that I had no idea could be stashed. Really creative event, and just made me realize how many great programs that the Madison Youth and Family Services folks are running every single day, and should be commended for. Derek Cornwell actually brought his therapy dog, Brew, into the session as well, which was kind of cool. So I got to meet Brew, so I enjoyed that. And I guess that's it. That's all I have.
I attended the senior commission meeting last Thursday. Not a lot of updates. Both Boston and Heather are going to be finishing up on all of the tax relief, which I think tomorrow is the last day, but the number of applicants was up 200 this year, which is pretty interesting. The other thing they talked about was this program, and I think it's being done in conjunction with Madison Youth Services for some students over the summer to work with the senior center, specifically serving meals. I didn't realize that they only have one server for all those people that attend the lunches. So they're going to have some students working there for a period of time. But he also mentioned that they're always looking for volunteers for anybody that's got some time and wants to help out with serving lunches. And then also there's a group of students that are going to be helping seniors in doing I would say relatively light yard work over the summer. The residents have to apply for it because it's limited, but helping, weeding and this type of thing, cleaning out garages, no major power tools, obviously. So that was interesting. That was about it.
Thanks.
Board of Police Commissioners, two things. The chief highlighted another sharing arrangement that apparently I'd forgotten about, but he highlighted for police commissioners that there is a regional SWAT team that exists in this region, and that Madison has 3 officers that serve on that SWAT team, and I understand they were involved in some action recently.
One of the 3, yes.
Yeah. So that was good to be reminded about. And the chief also reported that there's been another graduating class from our senior academy, which is a program run by now both the Madison and Clinton police departments to educate citizens who are interested about the workings of the police department. And that program's been run for another year, and we now have 30 new graduates. Finally, I wanted to react to my fellow selectmen's comments about the budget referendum tomorrow. I wanted to, I don't know that we have a policy here, but it seems to me we should be using all of the tools of town government to remind the public about these things. And I just took a quick look at the website, and if there's a reminder on there, I didn't see it. It's certainly not prominent. I'm also wondering what other electronic tools are at our disposal, our push emails. I'm not trying to create a policy at the moment, but I just think we should be using all of our tools to remind our electors it's time to come out and vote. And I'd love to see us get something out today just to remind folks, we usually get such a low turnout for these things that I think it's our responsibility to do whatever we can just to make sure we're putting information out.
Yeah, we can do an email blast, we can put it, I'll make sure it gets up on the website. And we can also talk to the school department, because they have a list of.
Now, the cert thing, or?
Yes, sir, yeah, so.
Good.
We'll have them, and it'll just be a reminder that there's a.
Can you do a call? I mean, is there a way to do a robocall? Is that simple to do?
Don't know if I'm allowed to for something like that.
Yeah. They like robocall typically to be more of matters of emergency and things like that. They don't want to like set a precedent of doing robocalls for things that
Who's they?
aren't urgent.
They,
The system that we subscribe to.
But I've already sent an email to the webmaster to have her send out a reminder right now, to put a reminder on the website. And she also does the listserv for the Board of Ed side, so she just checked it.
Right, and in years past, I've always gotten a text. I mean, I subscribe to all the alerts, but I think there's usually a text alert that goes out as well.
If you subscribe on the website for notifications, you can do notifications through your email or through your text, or both. I get both. But that's something that you would have to go to madisonct.org, hit the subscribe button, and subscribe for and enter your cell
Right.
phone number. But anything that gets sent out via email gets sent out via text automatically. It's like an automatic system.
Okay, the only thing I have to add is kind of tagging along with what Gene talked about the meals over at the senior center. Austin also sent out a request for anyone who's available to help with Meals on Wheels, delivering meals to homebound people. So if you're available, keep that in mind. It's usually during the midday.
And I'll just add, it takes about 2 hours. So it would be about 11 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, maybe a little bit less, depending on the route. So it's not a big time commitment.
Great. Anything else, anybody?
motion to close.
Excuse me, again, when will the committee be looked at or addressed?
I know, I didn't.
It's all right.
So maybe we can comment back and forth to each other about how we
I
think.
think we're going to work on it
how
for the next
that should
meeting.
work.
Let's try to get it, group for the next
Appointed
week.
for the next
So
meeting.
I would comment that maybe we all start to float lists with each other, and if we have somebody that we think is a likely candidate, maybe we can approach them privately and say, would you be interested?
Yep.
Yep.
And I think some people have reached out.
Yeah. And we have people who have
So
reached
we
out,
have a
right,
list of people
right.
who've reached out.
So then our hope would be that we are taking action in the next meeting.
Great. Scott?
Motion to close.
Or adjourn.
Or adjourn.
So now we just want to stick around and settle on the meeting.
Just second it.
Oh, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.